Hey guys, we are going to review the quadratic formula today. You should have learned this last year, so it shouldn't be new, but I think a refresher is good. So we're going to practice solving with using the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula can be kind of tedious. A lot of students don't like it because it's so long, but the reason we like the quadratic formula is that it always works. So factoring doesn't always work. Some polynomials you won't be able to factor. So factoring is nice when you can use it, but again, it doesn't always work. So the quadratic formula always works. That's why we like it. But in that being said, if you can factor, you would want to factor first. So quadratic formula is really something you probably just want to use as a last resort. I would check to see first, can I factor a polynomial? If I can, I'm going to do that. Can I use one of the polynomial identities that we learned? Because that still is going to be faster. And then if I can't use those things, then I'm going to use the quadratic formula. So again, kind of a last resort because it does take the longest amount of time. So steps for using the quadratic formula is you want to make sure that the equation is in standard form. That means it needs to be equal to 0 on one side, so everything needs to be on one side of the equation. Then you're going to plug a, b, and c into the equation. And that's coming from the formula where you have ax squared plus bx plus c equal to 0. So those are going to be your coefficients and your constant number. So we're going to plug those into this formula right here, and then you're just going to simplify and solve. So hopefully you have this formula memorized, or at least kind of remember it from last year, but it's x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And a lot of people have like that cheesy little song where you can sing it to the Pop Goes the Weasel tune, and that will be stuck in your head for your whole life. So. But let's practice. So on all of these, just spoiler alert, I did pick ones that you have to use the quadratic formula for. So these ones are not going to factor, and they are not going to have a polynomial identity that we can use. So we're just going to jump in and get our a, b, and c. So a on this one would be the number in front of x squared, which is 1. B is going to be negative 2. And c is going to be negative 3. Make sure you're bringing those negatives with. And we're going to plug them right into here. So we know x is equal to a negative b, and I like to use parentheses as I write it. B here is negative 2, then plus or minus the square root of b squared, so negative 2 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is negative 3. And then all divided by 2 times a, which is 1. So that's your plug-in stage. You're literally just taking these numbers and plugging them in wherever there's an a, b, or c. Then once you have them plugged in, you are going to simplify. So for example, we have a negative, negative 2. Those two negatives are going to turn to a positive 2, plus or minus. And then in our square root, we have negative 2 squared. Negative 2 times negative 2 is going to be a positive 4. And then here we have negative 4 times 1 times negative 3. Well, negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Negative 4 times negative 3 is a positive 12. And then all of it is being divided by 2 times 1, which is 2. So that's kind of the first step of simplifying. But then we can simplify again because we can add the 4 and the 12 together. So now we have 2 plus or minus the square root of 16 over 2. And then lucky for us, 16 is a perfect square. So the square root of 16 is 4. So we get 2 plus or minus 4 over 2. So here, this plus or minus is really saying we have two answers. We're going to split this up. We have 2 plus 4 over 2, and then we also have 2 minus 4 over 2. So let's simplify those numerators now. 2 plus 4 is 6. 6 divided by 2 is 3. So there's one answer. To subtract 4 is -2. And -2 divided by 2 is -1. So those are our two answers. So we would say that x is equal to 3 and -1. I'll just put a comma in between them to separate. So hopefully that was a good refresher. Let's try another one. So on this one we have a equals 1, b equals 3, and c equals 3. We're going to plug it in. So x is equal to a negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 3, all divided by 2 times a, which is 1. So that's the plug-in step. Now we're going to simplify. So here we just will have a -3 plus or minus the square root. 3 squared is 9. And then -4 times 1 is -4, times 3 is -12, all over 2. So now we can simplify this again. We get 9 subtract 12, which is a -3. So we're going to have -3 plus or minus the square root of -3 over 2. So if you remember, one of our big rules in math is that you can't take square roots of negatives, which right now we do have a square root of a negative. So that's where your imaginary numbers come in. So whenever you get a negative in the square root, you are going to rewrite it. So instead of having a square root of a -3, we're going to have the 3 still, but we're just going to turn it into an I, a little kind of squiggly I. So get rid of the square root and the negative, and it just becomes an I. Oops, I forgot. We still keep the square root over the 3 because we didn't take the square root of it. So we have -3 plus or minus the square root of 3, but then instead of having that negative, we just bring it out and we put the little curvy I for the imaginary number. And then we still just have that divide by 2 on the bottom. And then because this one is an imaginary number and this is just a regular number, these aren't considered like terms, so I can't add them together. So I still do have technically 2 solutions. This would be like I have -3 plus the square root of 3i over 2, and then -3 minus the square root of 3i over 2. So it's still 2 answers, and they're not very pretty, but that would be how you would write it. So don't be afraid when you do run into those negatives. Just take the negative and turn it into an I for an imaginary number. Okay, and then let's try another one. So here, first find your A's, B, and C. A is 1, B is -6, C is 9, and we'll plug those in. So we get x equals a -b, so -6, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so we get -6 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 9, all divided by 2 times a, which is 1 again. And then we simplify, so here we have a negative, which will turn into a +6, plus or minus the square root. -6 squared is a +36, and then -4 times 1 is -4, and then -4 times 9 is -36, all divided by 2. So then on this one, we got 36 minus 36, which is just 0. So we have 6 plus or minus the square root of 0 over 2. Well, the square root of 0 is just 0. So this one's kind of a funny one because I'm going to get, again, this is 2 answers. 6 plus 0 over 2, which is just 6 divided by 2 equals 3. But then also 6 minus 0 over 2. So I get 6 over 2 again, which is also 3. We don't need to write that answer twice, so we just need to write it once. So this is one where we just have one solution. X just equals 3 would be your answer. Okay, so that one's kind of an easier one. Let's do this one right here. So on here, this time A is 5. So far we've always had it as a 1. B is -4 and C is 1. So let's plug those in. So X will equal a negative B, which is -4, plus or minus the square root of B squared. So -4 squared. Subtract 4 times A, which is 5 this time, times C, which is 1, all divided by 2 times A, which is 5 this time. So there's our plug-in step, and then now we simplify. Again, we have a double negative, so that's going to turn to a +4, plus or minus the square root. -4 squared is a +16, and then -4 times 5 is -20, times 1 is still -20, so we get a -20 there, all divided by 2 times 5, which is 10. Okay, so we're almost done, but now we can simplify inside the square root. 16 subtract 20 is -4, so we get 4 plus or minus the square root of -4 over 10. So on this one, we did get the negative again. So we do take that out. We're going to have the square root of 4, but then turn it into an I instead of having a -4 over 10. But on this case, 4 is a perfect square. We can actually take the square root of it. On this example up here, 3 we can't take the square root of, so rather than have some ugly decimal, we just leave it in the square root. But we know the square root of 4 is 2. So we can turn this to be 4 plus or minus 2i over 10. And then again, this plus or minus means there's 2 answers. And we can reduce some of this stuff in here. If we look at 4, 2, and 10, those all have a common factor of 2. So I can divide everything by 2 here. So if I take a 2 out of everything, 4 divided by 2 is 2, 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. So think of reducing all of those numbers. So we're going to have x is equal to 2 plus or minus 1i, and you don't really need the 1, you can just put an I over 5. And so you can write it just as one solution like that with the plus and minus together, or you can break it up and do 2 plus I over 5, comma 2 minus I over 5. And either works. Most people are lazy though, and we'll just write it this way so we don't have to write it twice. But that was just another one with imaginary numbers. So don't freak out about the i's. They're really not that bad. You're pretty much just adding a variable to it. Whenever you see that negative on there, you're just going to take the negative away and put an I on the outside instead. And that's kind of our little workaround whenever we have a negative inside a square root, since we're not technically allowed to do that. So hopefully that was a good review of your quadratic formula. If you haven't, memorize it, because it's not going away. I know it's not your favorite, but we're going to keep using it. So get that formula memorized. And if you guys need any help, please reach out to me, email me or message me through Canvas, and I am here to help. It's my job. So hope you guys have a great day. See you later.